Okay, so we're going to have a chat today a little bit about some of your sort of thoughts, observations on the channel, and perhaps we could start with how vendors and even distributors perhaps try to sell product to MSSPs as opposed to maybe sort of working with them and helping them to find suitable new solutions, portfolio enhancements, and on better ways of work, I suppose. Yeah, just your thoughts as to what's going on.
Yeah, I suppose it's important to preface that the answer to the question is going to be a fairly sweeping statement. It's not going to be true of every single vendor, but generally speaking, the technology channel is set up to do what we usually do, which is you hook in a distributor, you pass that on to a reseller and train them, who then work with the end customer, and the end customer tends to work with the reseller and the vendor to buy a technology product, and the services are either wrapped around it or they are included as part of the conversation. But ultimately, the focal point is the product. In the managed services world, I was very fortunate to be the head of the services portfolio management function at my last company for 6 of my last 7 years, and the 7th year I spent working to promote that business. And one of the big frustrations that we felt at the time, and actually since then, is that vendors are not set up and ready to support MSPs to develop service capability. What they want is to shift their products, and they view it as a good MRR, so good monthly recurring revenue. And they're not always sensitive to what the service provider is doing today, and whether or not their technology will fit in as a new feature within a service, or whether it will create a whole new service capability. And of course, to a service provider, you're providing continuous levels of service to your customers. So you need that continuity. And the decision to, for example, swap out, so where a competitive swap out might be a fairly simple thing to propose in a commercial sense, in a resell motion, in an MSP sense, it is probably the last thing you want to do, because actually retiring a service is really flipping difficult. And it's likely that you end up creating a secondary service whilst also maintaining the primary service that was perhaps using another product. So it's really critical that MSPs are increasingly supported by their aggregators. I say aggregators, sometimes we call them distributors, but the aggregators of service MRR subscriptions are supported to go and help them to develop that service capability. Because sometimes the vendor either hasn't got time or inclination, or they're very good in the pre-sales motion, but not so good in the post-sales motion.
So if I got it right, you're almost suggesting that in the same way that the channel sort of adapted itself to the different, the new needs, if you like, of their customers, it's for the people, the vendors, and maybe even the disties, they haven't fully adapted what they're doing on behalf of the channel. Is that fair?
I think because of if you think about the nature of vendor and distribution, it's all a big transaction aggregation game. Again, sweeping statement, generalizing, and that probably generalizes on the largest players in both markets, particularly the distribution market. There's been a real race to develop marketplaces, and marketplaces are incredibly valuable. I call it a hygiene factor. An MSSP needs to be able to simply report the consumption of any type of technology that might be part of their service on a monthly basis, and that needs to go up and down based on customers joining, moving and leaving. But of course, there has been so much money that is needed to be spent by providers to build marketplace platforms. I'm talking multi-millions. That of course that has become the focal point. So let's stack it high, sell it at a huge volume. And of course, if you're, say, trying to bring in hundreds of MSSPs into a marketplace platform because you've got to do that because your investment is so huge, then how do you provide the value capability on top to that sort of plethora of customers? The answer is you can't. It's not as the value proposition, helping an MSP to build their to create their service and develop service is not linear with the growth of a marketplace model. And that's why the market is the way it is. That's why you have a lot of providers, brilliant organizations like Pax8 globally, who are doing a fantastic service on that marketplace edge. And of course, vendors are very similar. They see the marketplace model as a way to go and get the transactions done and in quickly, forgetting that at the nub of it, there's a service provider whose only income is generated through service and service levels and service enhancements. And because the market, regardless whether you're in the cloud solution, cloud service provider markets, so the CSP market or the MSSP market, managed security service providers, those two markets are so incredibly competitive that actually the service quality and the service features is far more important than the technology products they're buying.
Yeah, so come on to that. So people, or again, everyone in the supply chain, if you like, needs to understand and appreciate the nuances when it comes to service design, the improvement, and even retiring of that. So is the suggestion again that we don't want to beat up the vendors too much, but are they the folks that perhaps aren't fully understanding of the importance of those nuances and that everything else sort of suffers as a result, or is it happening elsewhere as well?
I think it's just a question of time and availability. So yeah, I mean the vendors that do MSP well might have a good, what they call, partner account manager, and that partner account manager will do their level best to look after the customer, i.e. the MSSP, because of course on a revenue level that MSP will act as a massive multiplier on new service or new business sales for that vendor partner account manager. But coming to your point on service design is critical. A lot of MSPs haven't got dedicated teams that will look after the research, so what I call the UX, or the user experience end of the service. They haven't got the service architects. They don't have a dedicated product management team. They definitely don't have a dedicated program management team for the service portfolio. They will have product and program managers for customer projects, but they won't necessarily on that front edge. And that responsibility needs to sit somewhere. And I think the best aggregators or vendors, and I say aggregators, that can be in a vendor or distribution capability, they are the best ones will offer that as a service to their partners and recognize that if we can help this MSP to develop a new service which is nuanced and I would say customized, it's nuanced for that service provider, then it's highly more likely that they're going to bring that service into life and go operational with it than if I just sit there and keep telling them that the monthly recurring licensing model is X and these are the features of the product. So that's I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and to this landscape, we introduced maybe the importance of a third-party resolver group that can sort of harness greater cyber capabilities. So, and I think also they can help in terms of information insights, deliver more cyber intelligence. So yeah, I guess the role of those organizations in improving the situation that you described.
I think most MSSPs are I'll say MSSP specifically in context of the question you've asked. You've asked about security services, but this applies to any MSP. All MSPs use third-party resolver groups. And what I mean by that, what is a resolver group? Well, that's why you might have, I don't know, you've built a service around Microsoft Sentinel. You've decided that you haven't got the cash to go and build an incident response capability with forensic investigation. And so you go out to a third party and you talk to that third party service provider and you say to them, hey, look, you've got something that we really need, but we need it to look part of our service. Have you got a commercial model that we can use to make that part of our service? And then, of course, the MSP's service desk is the one that then talks to the customer, understands the requirement. And if it's equivalent to a 999 call, i.e. we've had a breach, then of course they pick up the phone to their third-party resolver group. And in, as I say, if MSPs are listening to this, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because a resolver group is just anyone that can solve something. That could be their own internal resolver groups, or it could be third-party. And that third-party capability, particularly in the security world where skill sets are so blooming expensive, you're paying top dollar for to get any sort of expertise with a good degree of experience. That actually being able to subscribe to a service which is third party is going to help enhance your own capability at a much lower cost point than it would. And I use the word cost point importantly rather than price point. Customer paid prices. MSPs have a job to do. They've got to manage income, and then they've got to manage cost. And of course, the trade-off between the two is where you make your profit. And that's why the profit margins in general, so you're talking price point to a customer, are so large in the MSP world. They have to be somewhere north of 50% gross margin, because actually by the time you wash out all your costs, you're not left with a lot because of the expertise you've got to hire. So that's the point around addressing your question there about third-party resolver groups. And MSPs should feel like that's an okay thing, as long as they're able to match culturally with the third party and make sure that they're going to be great with customer service, and they're going to have good expertise, and they're going to be quick with their response times, and they shouldn't feel any sort of failing in going out to a third party. It's just good, sensible business if you can attain that skill set without incurring the fixed cost in an FTE or a full-time employee salary base in your own cost model.
And bearing in mind we've been perhaps slightly critical of the vendors, but I think you also believe that MSSPs, as they grow, they need to potentially become more like vendors in terms of their, I know, raising their game more, I say professional, but perhaps that's not the right word, but just they need to become more like vendors. In what ways?
I totally get the angle. It's MSPs are limited by their own sales team. If they're serving end customers, they can only go to the customers that they can reach. And of course, when you're running a high cost base and most of your staff and most MSPs that would describe themselves as an MSP organization probably have 80 to 85% of employees working in their technical teams, and the rest are in back office and sales functions. And so, of course, when you're sort of building that sort of technically rich capability, in order to increase your sales surface area, the sensible thing to do is to go to channel, like vendors do. And vendors are no different, right? All vendors I come across, all startups and scale ups, start by creating their own sales team, and they focus on direct engagement with customers, which they might transact through the channel or they might not. Now, actually, when I look at the MSP model, their limitation is very similar. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, because they're selling service and there's an absolute operational ceiling to the amount they can do based on their employees. Whereas compared to a software or a software as a service solution from a vendor, which is you've developed it, now you just need to sell it as much as you can. But yes, if an MSP, and I think a really, really brilliant example, not many people will necessarily know this, but Arctic Wolf was an MSP back at the beginning of its lifetime. And Arctic Wolf today, everyone would go, well, what are you talking about? They're a vendor. Yes, they are a vendor, but they were an MSP. And at a point in their life cycle, they realized that they could do more with this. All they've got to do is to achieve scale. And that's operational scale, geographical scale, and of course, sales scale. And they have their own sales functions. But as we know, they're a very good, very well recognized channel focused vendor today, but they were an MSP. And I think that is what all MSPs should be looking at, or could be looking at, not should be, because some do provide a very good local support. So for example, if you're a Manchester-based business like we are and you want to go and buy some good IT support, chances are you're probably going to go and focus on someone that's based in the Manchester area, and you'll probably find that that provider only serves the Manchester area. And if that is their focus as a business, strategic imperative as a business is to focus on the local area, then you don't really need channel. But if you're an organization that is larger and you've got hopes and dreams, and you're perhaps spending multi-millions on building a data center capability over a period of years, you're going to need to at some point go all in on channel, and then think of yourself like a vendor, which means you need a channel team, you need a channel program, you need all the stuff that a vendor would have. And then at that point, what is separating an MSP from being a vendor? Well, it's us. It's just our decision. Do I choose to recognize this entity as a vendor or as an MSP? And largely, it's just the channel model that makes us feel like it's a vendor or not.
And to that point, do you? I mean, clearly, we have to have definitions and name certain organisations, I guess. But is the sort of definition of organizing. You mentioned the marketplace, earlier on, for example. That's a relatively new trend. So, is it helpful to still use these names, or do we need to come up with a slightly different vocabulary to describe the various entities within the sort of channel supply chain, or we just need to understand that the existing names can do different things from perhaps we've thought they could? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So do we need to? Well, I think that's a kind of a behavioural question. I think we don't need to. I mean, realistically, we know what a distributor does. It takes something from a vendor and it transitions it and explodes it outwards on an aggregated level to many, many more partners than the vendor could get to themselves. Does it describe the job that a distributor does? Because obviously, if you think about why the word distribution exists across all verticals, not just the IT and OT channels, it's organizations that get product to many places from one go. If you think about the distribution center that Tesco uses, your local distribution center, it goes off and serves many, many stores. And that is, I think, like psychologically, we think of product and we think of distribution. When you look at the job of a distributor, again, I'll come back to Pax8 as a global example. Are they a distributor? They're a master aggregator of services. That's what they do. They aggregate services on a very, very vast level, and they supply those to many, many businesses around the world on a very high volume level. So we could, like, for example, with Distology, if we enter the MSP market, I'll very much be pushing the master aggregator expression, because I think if you're an MSP and you get presented with a distributor, in fact, if you're any channel organization, you get presented with a distributor, you instantly have a preconceived idea of what that business does. And if you're an MSP, you sat there and you probably roll your eyes. What is a distributor for? Great. I mean, I've already got one. Like I've got a marketplace that I'm going to log on to, and I'm going to place my orders. I don't need them for anything else because they don't provide me any other value. And that is the point. Well, actually, if I'm a master aggregator or a master service provider, and you're a managed service provider, am I now more aligned to you if we start to use the same vernacular? Because if I'm not, and I'm a distributor to MSPs, maybe I'm just the same level that you're already getting from your current distribution partners. So I think it depends on what the business is doing in the supply chain, but there is definitely an opportunity for us to reconsider what it is that the middle entity between vendor and MSP is called and does. But it's kind of an academics conversation, and they will probably will just get on with it, and it will just be down to us doing a good job of articulating what we do.
And in terms of yourselves, Distology, just be good before we finish to understand a bit about what's going on. And I think you fairly recently announced a strategic partnership with Vercara, so it'd be good to understand a little bit about the background to that and what it is that you've onboarded with them.
Yeah, no, it's a good segue. So when I arrived at Distology 3 years ago, and actually since then, we've been transacting with MSPs because we are the distributor, as you know that in the real term, of product to MSPs who then bake it into their service. Now, having come from a superb services portfolio management function at Softcat, which is my previous employer, and recognizing the value that offers, I have always been very keen for Distology, when we do MSP properly, to go and make sure that, one, we've got the technologies that are built for and resonate with the MSP world. Actually, let's be really specific here. We're a cybersecurity solution provider, so it's the MSSP market is the one that we're addressing. And then when we present ourselves to those vendors, we need to have the right technologies and also the right capability to add value to those service providers. So you can bet your bottom dollar part of that's going to be some of the stuff that I learned while we were building our portfolio management function at Softcat. And then the other part of it is being really sensitive to the MSPs that they are being spoken to, because we believe, based on the understanding of that MSP's portfolio, there could be a benefit in developing a service or a service feature around that capability. You mentioned Vercara. Vercara is the new name for New Star Security Services. They were previously part of New Star Inc. and spun out of that company about 18, 20 months ago through a divestment strategy from New Star Inc. And they provide a range of security services to MSSPs for DNS security, distributed denial of service, and they are every bit set up for that MSP market. And why is that? Well, one, their service, it's a good example, I think, their service capability is set up to be multi-tenanted. Now, multi-tenancy is an absolute essential. I was speaking to another one of our vendors who could be brilliant in the MSP market, but they haven't built it multi-tenant. So I said to them, well, I don't understand how you're going to address the market if an MSP can't log on and see all their customers in one place. If you've got to log on multiple times for each customer, you're kind of creating an operational inefficiency, and it's not going to go anywhere. Vercara, on the other hand, are providing something that a lot of MSPs need, which is DNS security. And DNS is how internet gets into and out of an organization. And then they're providing, like I mentioned earlier, the resolver group. So if DNS is where all internet flows to and from, Vercara are now offering what they call ultra DDR. And ultra DDR is a set of managed service experts in their SOC to act as an enhancement layer to any MSP. So now not only can you consume your DNS security, which frankly you can buy from a lot of different providers. Okay, Vercara have a third of the world's global coverage across all DNS, which is a phenomenal level of coverage and therefore intelligence. But they're also offering you an enhancement to say to your customers, look, actually, if you want to, you can subscribe to our enhanced service on DNS, which provides full mitigation and instant response. And that's just covered as part of the transaction. And because Vercara themselves have set up to be an MSP-focused organization, they do that at such a huge economy of scale that the cost that the provider will incur by introducing that service is so much lower than if they were going to try and do it themselves, or in fact buy it from anybody else. So I think that's a good example, and it's the beginnings of. We actually have about 4 vendors in our portfolio now that are of that ilk, that are set up, created, developed for MSPs. I'm not going to reveal right now because that'll steal my own thunder for a few months' time. But those are going to help and enable us to be the same business we are today to our reseller and solution provider partners, to our MSSP partners, so that we can help them to improve their business, deliver better level of service to their customers. And more importantly, better is subjective. We treat every partner in their own way for their own benefit, so that the strategy we develop with them is for them. It's not us pushing our own desires upon them.
And bear in mind what you just said there, is it fair to say that in the same way that when it comes to vendors, that the cloud native ones potentially have an advantage in this day and age, as opposed to the legacy ones that then try to get to the cloud? Would you say that it's the same for your vendors, in terms of making their solutions MSP sort of ready, as opposed to what they've already got, and then trying to shoehorn them into some, that might be a bit crude characterizing, but is that a fair?
No, it's a great leading question, and I'm just going to agree with you. The answer is yes. I mean, anybody that is developing anything today, any entrepreneur that's developing a system, should be thinking about making that cloud native, so it runs in the cloud for the cloud, and it's multi-tenanted from the get-go. Unless, of course, they've decided that it's absolutely not appropriate for MSSPs and it should only be for end customers, and that's their target market forevermore. But more and more vendors are waking up and going, I know what, we'll do MSSP. And they weren't MSSP previously. And yes, they do have a potential systems retrofit. So they have got to make sure their solution is ready, that it can be hooked into, have a good open API capability so it can hook into the MSP's own platform. But I suppose here's my cynical chuck-in that I'm going to chuck into the back end of this question. I think a lot of vendors at the moment are ambulance chasing into the MSSP market because they're struggling in the resale market because it's so busy, particularly in cybersecurity, and they are deciding to pivot their business towards MSSP when actually they're not an MSSP organization. And that's going to take a bit of doing. It's the difference, like I say, I've kind of repeated, but I'll summarize. I think it helps to summarize the conversation. To address MSSP, you've got to be specialist in MSSP. You can't take an end customer salesperson and tell them they're now selling to MSSPs as well. In my experience, those two are not the same type of salespeople. They don't talk in the same way. They're definitely remunerated in a different way because you work for months to get an MSSP on board, and then all you're receiving is a monthly recurring revenue. Arguably, Microsoft partners will feel that anyway, because of course they have to work very hard to get a customer into Microsoft and with them. And of course, all they get is a monthly recurring revenue. However, of course, Microsoft have made that a little bit easier for partners in the past year because they've introduced a new fixed term program which keeps the customer with the part. With MSSPs, they don't have that luxury. They have to make sure that the customer is looked after from day one, and therefore they need to know that the organizations that are supporting them, both vendor, aggregation / distribution, are also on the same page as them and supporting them. So that's my advice to anyone that wants to work into MSSP from the vendor or aggregation world. What are you doing to make sure your business is lined up with the MSSP way of working, and can you demonstrate that in the way that you work?
Okay, and just finally, and you earlier suggested you don't want to give away too many secrets, but in terms of the roadmap, are there any sort of general sort of hints or thoughts you can give us as to where Distology might be headed? Just any thoughts you can share, that would be good.
Towards the end of our financial year, so somewhere in the second half onwards, which we're fiscal year aligned, you will see a Distology MSSP. And when that is out, it will be for MSSPs from their perspective to support them in the way we do today. And we have a great reputation across our partner base in the resale world in both IT and OT channels now for supporting them in the way that they need to do business. And that's subjective to each partner. And the MSSP will be no different. And the technologies that we have in there will be MSSP ready from the beginning, and will likely be additive because each of these vendors are, I won't say new, but they are refocusing their capabilities in MSSP, with the exception of Vercara, who are long-standing MSSP world. But yes, it will be a good proposition, and I hope to delight the MSSP partner base as much as we do the resale base today.
Okay, it's been great to chat. Some fascinating insights, thoughts as to what's going on, and we shall look out for that announcement. But at least for now, Lance, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.